joining us. I'm Indra Adnan, and this is...
Hi, Kane. Hi. We are the Alternative Global, and today, March the 1st, 2024, is our 7th anniversary of this project, and we have something exciting to show you and tell you. So show them and tell them, Indra.
Yeah, thanks very much. And what we're going to do today in this presentation and share with you is a very, very soft launch of a new political project that I would say the Alternative Global has been building up to for the last 7 years.
Well, here is the title and, in a sense, the story of our project. Winter is here, yet spring has begun. What do we mean by this? Well, we're taking the winter is here metaphor from a well-known fantasy series, but the implication of the metaphor is that we're in a challenging time as citizens on this planet. We are beset by crisis upon crisis that generate other crises that are all linked together. The phrase that's used has been used as the poly-crisis or the perma-crisis. But what this situation and predicament does is that it shakes the hopes of citizens. It makes them vulnerable, and particularly vulnerable to those who are willing to harness the fearful, angry, defensive emotions that are so accessible in the human condition, but also by virtue of people trying to elicit them to get certain ends and certain behaviours directed at a collective or a national or a corporate level. So that's the situation we're in. It's wintry and challenging.
And of course, it's not simply fights, and it's not simply the media or simply a feeling about the darkness of winter. There's very real consequences for people on the ground. It's a shock for most of us to find ourselves in this public space of permanent war again, when we thought maybe that was a thing of the past. We're trapped in this idea that one side must win against another, and each of us in our countries and in our communities are forced to take a side in a question that really begs the answer, will it ever end? And what we want to invite you into is a political space that says yes to that question. Yes, it can end. Yes, there's a possibility of moving into an age beyond war. Yes, there's a possibility of really shifting our relationship to the crisis that we're in. Yes, I'm going to commit myself. Yes, this is possible. This is really the heart of a political project called Spring. So when we talk about Spring as a political project, our shorthand is for the cosmolocal age. And we're going to be describing more what the cosmolocal age is, but hold that in mind. Pat, do you want to give us a quick insight into cosmolocalism?
Well, cosmolocalism has localism in the title and cosmo in the title. So in a sense, what it's talking about is the cutting edge development of communities. People who are living where they are, who want to exert powers over their immediate conditions, and they want to feel empowered in that way. But they have an access through the age of the cloud, through the age of the internet, through the age of networks, not just to great ideas and great plans that they can download and benchmark themselves against, but they also can connect with other communities, community to community across the planet. So cosmolocalism, which we'll explain further later on, is a kind of advanced community life for the 21st century going forward. That's how I would describe it. So just to remind you who we are, and this is an example of our 7 years of activity. We decided to create a framework called Planet A 2 years ago, and that's in a sense asking people to make a shift, what David Bollier actually calls an ontological shift. That's posh language. But what it is that where can you reconceive where you are standing on this planet? Can you understand it in a different way? If you understand it in a way that means that you think you can act you act in ways? Can you be resistant to people's scary or fearful or angry inducing appeals? Can we find a way to live on the planet A, the planet that we want to make possible, rather than the planet that we might escape to or that is failing us? What can be a positive sort of planetary mentality? So that's the kind of an illustration of the kind of thinking that we do. And then just to be more specific about it, we were specifically formed in response to the murder of Joe Cox, a terrible failure of official politics. In fact, the worst possible outcome from a contestation around Brexit. As we remember, Joe Cox was murdered a few days before the Brexit vote. So we explore, that's our intent, we explore new forms of power beyond official politics. And alongside looking at material needs, as politics usually does, we're very sensitive that there are also emotional needs that are satisfied by politics and public appeals, and that we have to get literate about those emotional needs. We have to do research into them. We have to be sensitive to them ourselves as feeling empathic creatures, which is often not the way that politicians or politics are described, as feeling empathic creatures. And that's the crucial moment that kicked us off, and it remains with us to the present. It's really important to consider these things through all the projects that we do. So I'll talk about one of these, and Indra can talk about the other. We've talked about cosmolocalism, but another way to describe it is local autonomy plus interdependence with planetary horizons, the opposite of parochialism. Maybe, Indra, you want to speak to eco-civilization?
Yeah, and I think the thing I want to really emphasize at this point is that our own language shifts from what we feel we must do to what we have seen emerging over this last 7 years. So from that moment of commitment after Joe Cox was murdered, to step outside the political bubble and to really see what has been emerging, what is taking shape outside of what we understand as the public space, what isn't really being written about, what is not really being talked about enough. And over the period of time leading up to this launch, one of the big ideas that has been taking shape in many different parts of the world is the idea of a coming eco-civilization. So what might that point at? It's not the invitation to something that is homogeneous, again, across the globe. In contrast to that, it's the many different forms that eco-civilization is taking in India, in Africa, in parts of Europe, significantly in China. Eco-civilization is a term that many, many different cultures have adopted for an idea of the future that would bring together the health of the human being within the health of communities with agency for the health of the planet. So eco-civilization points to the axis that we describe as I-we world. But what is phenomenal about it is that it is and has been appearing from different parts of the globe all at the same time.
And just to say that it's by far from being an anti-technological exercise, we kind of believe that it's natural for humans to be innovators, to be transformers, and so eco-civilization, contains the best use of technology. It doesn't exclude it. It's not Luddite about it.
We might mention also books coming by Jeremy Lent on the ecological civilization and movements from Violetta Bulk and EcoCiv. There are many, many more for you to chase up. So, of course, one of the things we're very conscious of is that as soon as you mention spring, it has a kind of temporal identity. Spring comes after winter, of course, we've mentioned that, but also spring quickly turns into summer and then into autumn. It is part of a cycle, but at the same time, spring brings with it a certain energy and a certain mindset that we want to make a permanent mindset. This idea that we can transcend at any given moment the stuckness of the binaries, the stuckness of two things fighting with each other. You might also simply be referring to dialectic process. One thing presents itself, another thing contradicts it, and then we can go beyond it. Spring is the going beyondness of the current mindset. So we might, for example, refer to growth versus degrowth. This is a very exercised argument going on in our public sphere. But regeneration really transcends both of those ideas and moves us into something that we can do together. You might say the same with the idea of, is it top-down leadership or is it bottom-up leadership? And we're saying that when we have this networked cosmolocalism, then we have a more of a distributed leadership. You might find leadership sometimes taking part with certain parts of the world, and then again other parts of the world, or within your community with those who've got a lot of experience, sometimes being superseded by those without experience, but with all the right questions. So leadership, and again, is something that doesn't need to be either top-down or bottom-up. So have a look at this list in your own time as just examples of what we call a spring mindset, which really tries to get to transcendence all the time, understanding that as soon as you arrive at a better place, a new set of binaries are likely to appear. But always understand that we can go beyond. That's the spring mindset. So just briefly to introduce that in year 6 of our trajectory at the Alternative Global, once we'd recognized that there was a place to be that we described as Planet A, we didn't need to go to Mars, as Elon Musk was saying, that we could find our feet on the ground where we are, if we can feel this new system coming. Nevertheless, there are so many, let's maybe even say the majority of us and even parts of ourselves cannot necessarily access that feeling or access that desire to be on planet A at any given time. So for that reason, we saw that there were at least 4 entry points that have been developing over the last 20, 30 years, in fact, as entry points into planet A. And we described them in year 6 as 4 incubators that anybody could get on board with and recognize themselves, this is my path to that future. So we're just going to go through these 4 entry points over the next few slides.
Which are a kind of program for spring, an early program. That's how they've kind of panned out. So let me speak to this, the first part of this one, which might be a bit intriguing to people if they haven't heard of the concept before. But this is the idea that spring is natality. And this kind of connects back to what we were talking about in terms of the importance of ascertaining the emotional needs that underline bad politics and good politics, a distorted society and a better society, to be alive and literate and sensitive to that. So this is in a sense saying, well, here's an emotion that we would want to, or an inner mindset that we would want to develop, which is natality. Natality comes from Hannah Arendt's great work. And what she meant by it was the possibility for humans to surprise themselves, to do new things, to be born and reborn, or to be born biologically and then to be reborn by coming up with new projects and a sense of a spirit of innovation. Bob Dylan's phrase captures it really well in Masters of War. He not busy being born is busy dying. Roberto Unger, the philosopher, captures it well when he says the point of living is to die only once. And what he means is not all those small deaths of being alienated in your practice, being feeling strange in your job, feeling disheartened by your public sphere. Is there a way where we can live where we don't have all those little deaths and we just die once and be in a state of creativity most of our lives? So that's a bet on human nature, or that's a stance towards an aspect of human nature that we think should fuel a new politics.
Mm. And the way that appears on the ground, because the whole project is not just an evocation or an idea or a wishful thinkingness. The way that this actually appears on the ground and has been appearing for quite some time, as we were saying before, not just the last 7 years that we've been looking, but it's been developing over decades. It's the curriculum for the development of the mind and body. the curriculum for developing new forms of power and agency. These things have been taking shape over time, and they're pretty solid now. We've been developing, or we've been noticing, new social software, new ways of communities coming into relationship with each other, so that neighbors who might never speak to each other have slowly been moving into relationship, and they have different tools such as anti-debates or polis or world cafes, tools for helping communities see themselves and each other. And through taking part in these kinds of events, you're getting your emotional needs met in new and healthy ways. We have our own prototyping form, which we describe as collaboratories, something that you could look up on our website. But in the end, all of these uses and self-developments, which might appear as, for example, a learning club in your community, they're all forms of prefiguring the eco-civilization that we see through these events coming down the line.
So another one of the incubators that we started a few years ago, but which is clearly, obviously, a component of a political project, is the economics. So Spring is also an economy, and there's a list there, and there's some images there of some of the extraordinary range of different kinds of thinking about economic value that have been developed, historically, but certainly intensely in reaction to the climate crisis in the last decade or so. Permaculture, you may or may not have heard of. You might have heard of transition towns, which permaculture is very much its philosophy. The idea of the fourth sector, which is beyond the third sector, which is people trying to be enterprising with answering social and cultural need. The whole question of land politics, which is very pertinent to where we are at the moment, based in Edinburgh, which we'll come and talk about in a minute. Community wealth building, which is the whole idea that you look at the assets in your community and you amplify them and get them to depend on each other and develop them. And obviously the whole context of a post-carbon, post-fossil fuel economy based on renewable energy. And there's a little graphic there just with all the different forms, 8 forms of capital. You could probably have several more. Above that is an image from the circular economy incubators. We are not short as activists and as visionaries for alternative economic models. What we want is to be trying to put them into practice, as the crises develop among ourselves, rather than waiting for some political party or some official political project to come and say, here's a new system, put a bet on us for the next 5 years, and then we'll revise that in 5 years' time. We don't have time for that. We should be experimenting with economic life, and that's the Spring element of that is what we're pointing to.
So we can both talk a little bit about this, but let me just say a few things. That Spring is a communication system, and in a way it talks for itself. When we think about Spring, it's a very attractive proposition. But how does Spring communicate itself? How does it become an attractor from the present to the future? In some ways, we're talking about a news gathering media platform, which Pat has been running through the Daily Alternative for the past 7 years. But there's also the aspect of how music and art draws and attracts people into community with each other, helps them to develop relationship. The arts and music, and to some extent, the feeling of being on social media is a huge attractor for vast amounts of people that go well beyond the 2% that a political program can gather and attract people into political parties, for example. Pat, I'm sure you want to say a bit more about this.
Yes, certainly. I mean, it's very important in a world where, as we mentioned at the beginning, people are trying to frame and prime people to understand reality in certain ways and in certain fearful and angry and despairing ways. It's very important, we think, politically for people to grab their own frame and establish their own frame and tie that to different forces, and which then generates a different picture of reality. So if you're looking at the world from a cosmolocal perspective, you have an appetite for local practical solutions that have global reference points or can be informed by people from around the globe. You're also thinking about the planet from where you are and your locality. And that's a connection that you think is legitimate. You feel as if what you do where you are will improve the health of the planet. So that requires a media, but also I think it requires maybe a new burst of media literacy and practice coming from communities. And we have a lot of material on our website which has been exploring and testing the possibility of that. But we think it could easily be an explicit appeal within a political project that we don't just bemoan the media, we become the media. And I think that would be a spring message.
And then finally, the fourth incubator that we've introduced and have been considering and deliberating for this past year is Spring as a New Political System. And those of you who've been with us for the past 7 years will know that right at the beginning, we were inspired and mentored by the Alternative in Denmark, which was a new political party led by Uffe Elbæk and others. And it was an incredible experiment which launched itself upon the world. And in a very short space of time, they were getting 3% of the votes, and up to 10% of the vote in Copenhagen. Quite a phenomenon, but we knew in the UK that as being part of a Westminster system, that there was no point in starting a political party. With a first past the post voting, it would just mean that we would, just disappear really, rather in the form of the Green Party that after so many years has only been able to get one seat. This is a fault of the system, and we decided that wasn't our opportunity at the time. So the question to, if politics is broken, what's the alternative? We opened in a much wider form as a political platform, and we did all the things that we've now been describing with the 4 different entry points into a different future. What we've been developing then, therefore, is a sense that in the 98%, if you like, of people who are not actively building political parties, not even joining political parties, there is a growing intelligence and a growing sensibility that can cross divides and help people to come together. And that in itself is possible to constitute as what we're describing a parallel polis. A parallel polis, in a way, being planet A, if you like, committed to cosmolocalism and eco-civilization. It's the real, human potential being constituted and having an architecture of its own deliberation, its possibility of making decisions about things, its opportunity of self-governance. When we really are conscious of that parallel polis and we feel that it can become something that we can join and be part of, then we have the possibility of building a new partnership with the current system and the state as it is represented. So this new idea, which very simply put, looks like these 2 legs serving the one body, the one leg being the current political party system that upholds, if you like, the institutions that we currently have, and the other being this infinite space of possibility that the humans who are alienated from the current system are building nevertheless. Pat, do you want to say a bit more about this new political system as we're proposing it?
Sure. I think one of the things that we believe that we have identified consistently over the 7 years is the vigor of what is called a civil society or social enterprise movements or peer-to-peer or commoning, and there's a whole set of names for it. But there they all are, the alternative polis, the parallel polis, building themselves serving people's needs, inspiring people, taking over buildings, trying out community broadband layerings, involved in all manner of enterprises that make them feel as if they're exerting power in their own lives in a tangible way. We think that's a political force, and we think that all that it needs to as it were realize its potential is partly us, people like us, mapping it, letting them see their own power by virtue of our media and our convening. But we genuinely think that it's a force for constructive good in any society, particularly in a moment of crisis where people feel as if it's very easy to surrender themselves to one big call to action and one particular force that could take them in a certain direction. I think we want to be strengthening communities and citizens where they are. And I think I think there is the precedent and practice for that. There is also the technology for it as well, which we can talk about at some point. We're happy to talk about it. It's all over our website. But we feel as if it's a very pregnant moment for a kind of parallel polis that sits and makes people feel as if they're directors of their own lives and is a countervailing power to the official politics, or at least can look at official politics and say, I have a strength that isn't dependent on a set of MPs or a parliament. I have my own strength as a citizen. So just on that theme, we've averted it before, but we have made a move from London to Edinburgh for various reasons, but certainly for the kind of reasons that are on the slide, which is if we believe that cosmolocalism is the sort of the form in which a better society and politics could happen, if we think that the target is an eco-civilization, a very radical and profound shift that we'll have to make in the face of the climate crisis, then where is that happening? And the truth, of course, is that it's happening all over the place. There's a map of bioregions in Europe, which is a way of looking at the ecological integrity of an area or of a territory or a locality. You could look at it that way. There's a picture of Kerala at the bottom, the famous radical Indian state, where I think they're doing democracy circles there, or neighborhoodocracy as they call it. There's a picture at the bottom of Costa Rica, which is, famously post-militarist society, but is also known and loved for its sense of the common good and acting to kind of serve that through amazing institutions, serving their health and their education. And also, well, why not Scotland to be a place where eco-civilization by means of cosmolocalism it doesn't just kick off, but builds on what's already there. So we think it's fair. We think Scotland is fertile ground for eco-civ and cosmolocalism. And people who may know me from a different part of my life or an overlapping part of my life will know I have an acute interest in the development of Scotland through its national parliament. And the Holyrood Parliament has a very interesting, what I would call policy majority, commitments to the importance of renewables, commitment to a well-being economy, which is about economy at service of people rather than people at service of economy. A historic and also extremely lively present interest in land reform. It's a bad percentages in Scotland in terms of how few people own so much land, but there's a lot of discussion from all parts of the society as to how that land question improves. Primacy of arts and culture, not just as a kind of an add-on or an economic multiplier, but as a kind of way to kind of improve and develop and support people's resilience and sense of empowerment and sense of agency. There's a Green Party in government, which is an outcome of a proportional system, which we'll talk about in a bit. And so there's a strong community architecture on offer. There is a bustle, which is best described by a great friend of mine and hopefully a friend of the Spring and Alternative going forward, Leslie Riddoch, who has written books like Blossom and Flourish and Huts that are all about talking about passionately self-determining Scots doing that and not waiting for permission, asking for forgiveness at least. So it's in short a fertile ground for the EcoCiv and the Cosmolocal takes on human development. So is there a politics of these fantastic terms, eco-civilization and cosmolocalism? Yes, there's a politics. We think that the parallel polis is a name for processes that connect and strengthen communities and citizens across the way, horizontally, organically, and that's we're going to call the building of a parallel polis required for EcoCiv and cosmolocalism as cultural and social targets. Now, will this parallel polis seek representation in political systems around the world? Well, if they have proportional systems, then they might well do, because that's at least a kind of an advanced form of democracy that relates seats to votes and allows smaller parties to have their voice in national parliaments. And the possibility for that exists in Scotland, also exists in Wales. Interestingly, the Welsh Parliament is also proportionally elected, but certainly exists in Scotland. There's a Green Party in government, which is a good sign up to a point in terms of the conventional nature of party politics, but there it is. But that's an outcome of the political representation system, the proportional system that has happened in Scotland. And are we up for that? Would Spring contend in that circumstance? Maybe, possibly. Let's see what organically grows from the kinds of interests and enterprises that we hope to be generating around about this discussion. It's not ruled out, but it would have to be a natural outcome of the processes that we're trying to amplify and set off from the Spring Initiative.
And we might say also, Pat, that that's not to say that nothing like this can happen in the rest of the British Isles, or that it isn't already happening in Europe. Just to keep reminding us that wherever it is that we focus and we put our attention, we will find that it's happening somewhere else as well. And for example, the model of flat pack democracy, which spread throughout the UK, was very much of a parallel polis variety, to have a strong community that then designs its representatives to go and take part in the current system. And that could well happen regionally across the UK, as it is happening in some parts of Europe and also even in the United States. So I think the opportunity for us here is to really model it very well and to see who else we can learn from. But, you know, why not? Why should Scotland not be the very best model of this kind of new form of politics that Spring is trying to bring?
Indeed, to be effective planetary citizens is the kind of the baseline. And why shouldn't that happen in this place as it is happening elsewhere? And we're being political entrepreneurs to some degree, trying to kind of, you know, strike, make an intervention, create a new process that just rides on existing energies, but has a global planetary viewpoint. And I think it's ambitious, but time is short, and we have to get on with things.
So finally, you know, what in reality is this launch? What are we launching today, March 1st, 2024? And how does Spring materialize, and how do we take part in it? That must be the question on anybody's lips as they're watching this very soft launch. And really, we're inviting you to answer that question with us, because at the moment, the most we can be, having been a media for all the entrepreneurship that has happened over the last 10 years, having offered new narratives, we now want to bring it really to the ground in any community that you live and open a space for discussion and evocation of Spring. So that could take the form of salons, performances. It might be people gathering in a convivial way, just holding the possibility of Spring being the new way of being on the planet. the spring way of being on the planet. We will certainly be developing our podcast series. We'll be doing salons that bring certain topics to our space in Edinburgh and sharing that through the traditional Zoom platforms with other people in other parts of the world. But mostly, we hope that you'll relate to this as a space in which you can participate to bring this possibility of the future, a surprising breakthrough in human and planetary potential. Please be here with us in exploring that. And importantly, once the spark has occurred, to stay with it, to try to bring it into being, because we don't want spring to simply fold away after a month. We want it to continue and to persevere until we can really see this new eco-civilization appearing.
So thank you for listening, staying with us to the end. It's a good metaphor, spring. It's not just flowers blooming, it's coiled bits of metal leaping out all over the place, with energy stored up inside it waiting to be burst out. So we're going to show you some slides, a slide at the end, which has ways to contact us and ways to dive deeper into some of the ideas that are lying behind this. But here we are on the planet, ready to do something that needs to be done. We're joining you, and please you join us. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.